Hello, thank you so much for joining us today. My name is Susan Evans, and I am absolutely thrilled to be welcoming Heather Snyder and Mikey Hoag to our webinar today. You are really in for a treat. Kensington Senior Living has 7 unique communities, 4 located in Virginia, Maryland, and New York, and 3 sister communities located in Northern and Southern California. Kensington is truly privileged to support caregivers and professionals coast to coast. Kensington focuses on relationship-based care, care built on the foundation of our promise to love and care for your family as we do our own. That promise is what initially drew me to become a member of the Kensington family, as my father, diagnosed with Alzheimer's disease, lived at Kensington for almost 7 years. It is programs such the ones you are attending now that are so important for us walking through a dementia diagnosis. How close are we to a cure for Alzheimer's? Today, you will hear the latest and greatest in a race for a cure. Founded in 2012, Part the Cloud funds research grants that are specifically intended to move treatments through the early phase clinical trials in humans. Since its inception, Part the Cloud has raised over $65 million to accelerate 65 projects across the globe. I spoke correctly, $65 million. Impressive. These projects have gone on to receive more than $1 billion additional funding to fund other sources. We are so grateful to Mikey Hoag and the Alzheimer's Association for your commitment. Thank you. If you're new to the Zoom platform, this webinar is in the webinar format. This means your cameras and microphones will remain off and muted throughout the presentation. We will have a live Q&A at the conclusion of the presentation. Each of our attendees today will be receiving a recording of this webinar, along with links to connect you with Part the Cloud. Please share this fabulous information with friends and family. Please join me now in welcoming Heather Snyder, Vice President, Medical and Scientific Relations, the Alzheimer's Association. Thank you, Heather. Please share a few words with our audience today about yourself and let us know what to expect.
Oh, great. Well, thank you so much, Susan, and thank you so much for having this conversation today. It's really through conversation and through raising awareness that we'll both be having those conversations then in our living rooms, right? Talking about what might be some of those early things that we should notice, having the conversations with our healthcare provider, and then hopefully getting access to those treatments that are available today or coming down the pipe soon enough. So I'm Heather Snyder. I'm the Vice President of Medical and Scientific Relations at the Alzheimer's Association. I'm one of the scientists on staff here, and I've been with the organization a little over 13 years, working on our science initiatives and a number of our other work. Really, our ultimate vision is a world without Alzheimer's and all other dementia. And that's through both resources in communities across the country, through our public policy and advocacy work, but then also through the work that we do with research. And it's been such a privilege and a pleasure to partner with Mikey Hoag and the Part the Cloud initiative and committee on the incredible work that we've done together to move the needle in funding innovative clinical trials in Alzheimer's. And so I'm so pleased to be here with Mikey today, who will share a little bit about herself and what drove you in establishing and founding Part the Cloud. Mikey?
Well, thank you, Susan. Thank you, Heather, for asking me to be part of this really important discussion. Like so many of you, I am deeply touched by this disease. My dad was diagnosed about 23 years ago, and I reached the Alzheimer's Association for so much needed answers, and we've been partnering ever since. In 2012, after losing my father to Alzheimer's, I partnered with the Alzheimer's to found Part the Cloud. Since then, my mom was diagnosed with the Alzheimer's, and I lost her battle in November of 2019. So after watching both my parents suffer from this disease, I had to turn up the heat on research, and it made it my life's mission to end Alzheimer's so that the next generation is not impacted the way my siblings and I have been. So finding a way to slow the progression, effectively prevent, and ultimately cure Alzheimer's disease is one of our greatest healthcare challenges of our time. Slide up.
And so this is a great opportunity and a great transition, Mikey, for us to then talk a little bit more about Part the Cloud. What is it? What are we trying to do with parting the cloud, to part the cloud?
So with Part the Cloud, I have gathered 14 women, all affected by the disease, and we are here to try to raise to further research. So I will continue with this presentation and I'll show you how we're doing that. Next slide. Okay, so, and unfortunately, our family's heartbreak is not uncommon. The stats are staggering. According to the Alzheimer's Association, more than 6 million Americans are living with Alzheimer's. By 2050, this number is projected to rise to 13 million. And in the last 20 years, 2000 to 2019, deaths from heart disease have decreased 7.3%, while deaths from Alzheimer's have increased 145%. 1 in 3 seniors die with Alzheimer's and other dementia. It kills more than breast cancer and prostate cancer combined. And almost 2/3 of the American with Alzheimer's are women. We'll talk about that later. In 2023, Alzheimer's and other dementias will cost our nations $345 billion. And by 2015, these costs could rise to as much as $1 trillion. In addition to the 11 million Americans provide unpaid care for people with Alzheimer's and other dementia. In 2022, these caregivers provided an estimated 18 billion hours of care, valued at nearly 340 billion. There are other health inequities in Alzheimer's. Older Black Americans are twice as likely to have Alzheimer's and dementia as other whites. Other Hispanics are about 1.5 times more likely to have Alzheimer's and other dementias as older whites. And an estimated 55 million people are living with Alzheimer's and dementia worldwide, a number that can only be changed for the future generations through research. While we've seen a lot of progress in the last few days, there is still so much work to be done. For every one of Alzheimer's clinical trial, there are nearly 50 cancer trials. I feel as though we're 20 years behind cancer, so it is time, there's no time to waste.
Yeah, and when we think about this and we look at those comparisons between Alzheimer's, dementia, and cancer, there's a lot of things that we can learn from cancer and the work that has been done in oncology. So for instance, some of the ways of how trials are set up or how they're engaging in communities. Some of the ways of using tools that can measure the earliest biology and using that as a way of enrolling participants in trials. And so as a field in Alzheimer's and dementia science, we've been taking those lessons and really translating them into our trials. And like cancer had, we've now in the last 2 years seen our first. And in fact, we've had recently the first drugs that were approved that were really targeting that underlying biology. They were targeting one of the hallmark changes that we see in Alzheimer's, the beta amyloid, which accumulates between the brain cells and something known as plaques. These drugs are called aducanumab and lecanemab. And these are both approved by the Food and Drug Administration, although at this point in time, they're not covered by the Centers for Medicaid and Medicare Services. And we can definitely get into that a little bit later if folks have some questions. But like what we've seen in cancer, like what we've seen in heart disease, these are our firsts, and we should celebrate that. And it's really things like Part the Cloud that are allowing us to go beyond those firsts. We're expecting another late stage report out of a drug called donanemab in the coming months. And we know that this is just the start of building our toolbox of drugs that may, or treatments that may help to target that underlying biology. And one of the things that's been just really tremendous with Part the Cloud is our ability to look at all of the biology that we're understanding is changing in this disease. It's changing in the brains of an individual. Things like the tau protein, one of the other hallmark changes that we see in Alzheimer's, the way the brain cells are communicating to one another. The immune system. We know that throughout the entire disease progression that there are changes that are happening in the immune system, not to mention the way the brain cells are producing and making energy in their food process, their food for processing for their every function. These are all changes that we see in disease, just to name a few, although there's a number of others. And it's really been with this greater understanding of the science that today we have over 140 unique ways or unique avenues of potential therapies that are being tested. And you heard at the beginning, Part the Cloud's been funding 65. We're funding 65 trials, which is incredible and really speaks to how we are supporting that diversity of that pipeline. And really a good way that I think about this, and I know Mikey, you and I have talked about this before, is we talk about Alzheimer's disease, right? And it's really a disease that happens over a number of years. There are brain changes that are happening. I talked a little bit about the hallmark brain changes, the changes in beta amyloid or the tau, but also changes in the immune system and cell function, the vasculature systems, as well as so many others. These tools that I mentioned at the very start that are allowing us to measure those biologies that are changing. This might be taking a picture of the brain through what we might call imaging. This might be looking in the fluid that our brain is sitting in. This might be one day looking in blood to being able to measure those changes and ultimately identify treatments, identify a treatment path based on someone's biology. Again, that comparison to cancer. This is what we do with a cancer diagnosis. You might be diagnosed with a cancer based on the specific biology of that tumor, the stage where you are in that progression. The oncologist or the physician designs or talks to the patient about the choices that they have in their treatment and their treatment path. And that really is with that toolbox of all of the potential therapies that may be really focused on that biology. And of course, part of that discussion, especially when we're talking about our brain, is also these ideas of what might be some of those modifiable risk factors, what might be some of those things that we can do, like being physically active, a certain amount of activity, what does that look like? And it's really putting all of that together. That's where the field is going. And Part the Cloud is absolutely essential. Of that red circle that you see of diversifying what we can be targeting and moving those into early clinical trials as quickly as possible. As soon as we understand the science, as soon as we identify ways to potentially target that science with a treatment, how do we get that into clinical trials as quickly as we can? And that's really where the inspiration and I think the drive of Part the Cloud is.
Thank you, Heather. So our mission, it's really quite simple. It's to fund Alzheimer's clinical trials with the highest probability of slowing, stopping, and ultimately ending this Alzheimer's disease. And I know so many of you on the call would love to see this happen. Since our inception, I've been so overwhelmed by the support we've received from so many, which has allowed us to grow from a local Bay Area event into a global movement. As we mentioned before, we're funding 65 clinical trials across the globe. Few Alzheimer's research funding supports early phase studies needed to test the drug treatments in humans, and Part the Cloud addresses the critical gap, what we call the valley of death that Heather will talk about later. And we support early phase critical clinical studies and helping accelerate the transition of finding the laboratory into the possible therapies. Part the Cloud continues to make record-breaking advancements through the funds we have raised, and I'm thrilled to share with our community that Part the Cloud has now generated over $65 million, and I'm hopeful and I'm optimistic that these funds will get us one step closer to finding a treatment for Alzheimer's disease in our lifetime. And Part the Cloud not only provides key funding for early phase clinical trials, but we also serve as a catalyst in helping other researchers receive additional funding for their work. After receiving the initial Part the Cloud grants, our grant recipients have gone on to receive $1.2 billion in follow-on funding from the federal government, from venture capital firms, and other sources. Every research grant awarded through Part the Cloud is moving innovative research in treatment and possible prevention forward. Every single dollar raised through Part the Cloud moves possible treatments closer to our doctors' offices. Part the Cloud is truly making a difference in the field of Alzheimer's research, and I'm grateful to the generous supporters and their commitment to our mission. With Dr. Maria Carrillo, Chief Scientist Officer at Alzheimer's Association, and our very own Heather Snyder, Vice President, and her team, we identify the most crucial areas to fund in order to propel research forward. Notably, 134 researchers from 15 countries provide expert review on grant applications. Part the Cloud grant applications undergo a rigorous multiple stage peer review process designed to ensure both scientific rigor and fairness in the review of all submitted applications. In our latest rounds, we had experts from Mayo Clinic, from Johns Hopkins, from Mount Sinai, just to name a few, to review the grant applications. We have now funded projects in the US, in Canada, the UK, Israel, Taiwan, Australia, Italy, Germany, and Spain. We're very proud of all of this.
Yeah, and as you said, this is an international movement. And not only are you seeing that here in terms of what we're funding and what's moving forward because of Part the Cloud, but it's actually something that our team gets regular inquiries about, is when is that next call? We need Part the Cloud funding. It's essential in helping us overcome that valley of death. So what is that? That's when there's an idea or there's an approach. We know what biology is important in disease. We have to target that biology. We have a potential compound, a drug maybe that was developed in another disease that we want to repurpose to test in an Alzheimer's, in a population of individuals with Alzheimer's. We need this funding to help move us over that valley, to help get us into the clinic, move us into those early phase clinical trials as quickly as we can. And that is a global movement in and of itself. The research community talks about Part the Cloud actively and regularly across the world, not just those that have received funding, but those that are seeking funding for moving their needle a little bit more forward. But also all of those reviewers. You heard Mikey share a little bit about some of those, and incredibly, we get feedback from them about how incredibly valuable participating in this review panel is, because it gives them hope. They see the incredible work, the diversity of the pipeline, the strength of the science moving forward, and that gives them a lot of optimism when they're then going to see their patients and having conversations with their patients. And so that translation is also so incredibly important. Part the Cloud has offered two different types of grants. So we've had the translational research grants. These are more of an open call, and it's really looking at where the science is and what are the hot ideas, what are those hot topics that we can move forward. So for instance, in the last open call, we actually funded a group that is looking at metabolic function. So that's really how the cells are producing energy and processing the energy for food source. And they're targeting, they actually for the first time are combining two different drugs that were developed for another purpose. They're combining them together in this population, a population of individuals with Alzheimer's, because these are two functions that we know go awry in Alzheimer's in the earlier stages. So they're looking at, if we put these together, do we have a stronger ability to slow that progression, to change that biology, which may actually really impact the health of the brain cells? And can we impact that in a way that you don't see the brain cells being as effective? And so this is really the first time that that's being tested in this population. We have another example of a group out of California who's partnered with a group in Ohio, and they're actually looking at a gene therapy for brain-derived neurotrophic factor. It's a long way of saying it's a happy way of it's the brain cells way of staying happy. BDNF, we often talk about it. Sometimes you'll hear it. It spikes when people are really physically active, as an example. And so this is an approach of, can you really look at the cells that are more vulnerable to Alzheimer's disease, and can you very specifically deliver this therapy to that part of the brain? And so that's examples of the kinds of really innovative and amazing science that we see come in through our translational research grants. The science is ready, the science is strong, and we need to move those into clinical trials. But we also recognize that there's certain areas that the science is accelerated. We know it's really important, but there's a lot of different potential avenues that could be explored. So an example is neuroinflammation. We know the immune system has changed throughout the entire disease progression in different ways, but our immune system in and of itself is quite complicated. So there might be different targets at different points along that pipeline that we want to be targeting. And so really one of the other types of grants is our challenge, where we actually have identified a specific topic really based on the strength of where the science is in the field, where we can say very specifically, this is a place we need to focus. This is a place where there is a lot of momentum that we need to identify and move things forward faster. How can we move them forward into the pipeline, into the clinic, as quickly as we possibly can? And so you see some of those examples here, and I know we're going to talk about our most recent challenge in just a moment. But all of this funding, all of this investment, it is moving that needle. We're changing the future in terms of how we're thinking about what's going forward. Now, not all of the 65 trials are going to translate into the next phase of moving down that pipeline, but that's just as valuable. Knowing that a potential drug or a potential compound shouldn't move forward is as valuable as knowing that there is really exciting science that should go forward. And so you can see here that we've had a number of examples where really they were first in human studies. There were over 25 that were first in humans. There were that are in that kind of early phase 1. There's 9 trials that they went from first in human and now they're into phase 2. And maybe I should just take a moment to say what is phase 1, phase 2, and phase 3. I feel like we have talked a lot more about this in the world since COVID, but phase 1 is really asking that question of, is it safe? So it's typically the first time that it's gone into a human or the first time it's gone into a specific population. So this might be a human population over a certain age or with a certain condition. Phase 2 is continuing to look at the safety, but is also starting to look at the dose. And really both at phase 1 and phase 2, we're also asking that question of, are you getting that engagement? Do you actually see the drug doing what you think it's doing? And then phase 3 is really asking that question of, does it work? Do you see a benefit for those receiving the drug versus those that are not receiving the drug? And so we've seen just this incredible push really through Part the Cloud of things going from the bench, 25 drugs into that phase 1, 9 that started at the bench, and they're now in phase 2. 20 trials that were in that phase 1 that are going forward, and 1 that actually started at preclinical and has gone forward, as well as others that we know are moving into phase 1 and phase 2 right now. So just an incredibly exciting time as we look at that pipeline. Again, there's 140 unique therapies, and Part the Cloud is a big reason why we've seen that continue to grow year after year.
Thank you, Heather. Now everyone can understand why we are so excited about this research when you hear her describe all of the trials we're doing. In 2020, we partnered with Bill Gates. For Bill Gates, this disease is personal. We are not getting money from the foundation. This is him personally. His father passed away from the disease, I think last year, and his uncle is also affected by it. So together, we explore specific areas of neurodegeneration, research focused on the mitochondria, or how neurons and energy are fueled, the autophagy, which is how brain cells remove waste and avoid toxic clumping, and vascular contributions, how blood supply impacts the brain. Since then, we've made tremendous progress in a really short time. There was 128 ideas were submitted, 18 countries, 32 international scientists peer-reviewed these applications, and over $30 million were awarded to 19 researchers to develop their proposals over a 3-year period. 12 are in the US, 1's in Canada, 3 in the UK, 1 in Israel, 1 in Taiwan, and 1 in Australia. One of those grants were awarded right here in our backyard at UCSF. The study went on to receive additional funding from the NIH and is conducting a phase 1 clinical trial with 55 participants from 3 sites. So UCSF has 1 campus working on this clinical trial, University of Pennsylvania and Northwestern University. The NIA's funding allowed the Mayo Clinic to be involved along with Houston and Las Vegas. None of this would have happened without the Part the Cloud funding. So I really want you to see how this funding is making these clinical trials move down the road. The thought that this one trial will encompass 6 different campuses is truly, truly exciting. So I am thrilled to share that we're going to be doing our next challenge in the next couple of months. We'll be announcing it and more information will be out about that. But to sum it up, Part the Cloud is changing the future of Alzheimer's disease research. So join us. Together, we will part the cloud. To learn more about Part the Cloud, visit alz.org/partthecloud. And thank you. Thank you for listening to us. We really appreciate it.
I am so touched, and I'll share with the audience a little bit. I didn't know if you heard the big rainstorm that just came by, but I'm in Northern California and it's not been fun. But I met Mikey Hoag about 11 years ago. And at that time, she noticed I was very uncomfortable with my father in a social setting. And she really helped me navigate through the difficult understanding of what the challenges I had. I didn't know what to expect. She put her hand on the small of my back and she said, let's meet, let's get together. And when my dad was diagnosed at Stanford, I expected exactly what Heather and Mike were talking about. I expected, we have this diagnosis. I was in there with my notepad. I said, what's plan A, plan B, plan C? What if plan B doesn't work? Then we go to B, and, and there was nothing. And so thank goodness for what you are doing for the entire world in parting the cloud and making lives easier. The $385 billion, and cancer gets 50 more than we do. Cancer has a plan. I mean, I don't wish that on anyone or anything, but we just need a plan. So just thank you so much for what you're doing. It really is heartfelt, and I'm sure the audience feels the same. And what Mikey said is, if we all give a little, let's get it from 65 to 70. Let's get 70 trials. So, and it's so impressive that you are working with UCSF and the Mayo Clinic and, all these research institutions, because together, I mean, the whole is much greater than the individual parts, and everybody has an idea. What about this? What about this? So thank you. I just applaud what you're doing.
Oh, thank you.
So let's go ahead and jump into some questions, and I encourage the audience to submit some questions as well. But these are the questions that were submitted at registration. So I'll go ahead and jump in. How do I qualify for a trial? This is from Anne. How long are trials? And how do trials fail? Can I start with Heather?
Yeah, absolutely. So, first, how do I qualify for a trial? So, the first thing is to know, right? Information is key. So finding a trial that's right for you. And it's important to know that not every trial requires that you be someone living with Alzheimer's or another dementia. You can be somebody that's providing care. You can be somebody that has a family history and you're just concerned and you want to engage. You can be someone that just wants to make a difference in clinical research, and there are trials for all of that. Some of them require you to go into the clinical site more regularly. Some of them might be in a community setting. Some of them might be online or a phone interview of some sort. So there's lots of different kinds of clinical trials. For parts of cloud and the trials that we're talking about here, there are clinical trials that are specific intervention, specific drug or device intervention that is then evaluating the impact of that intervention. So the length of a trial is very dependent on the trial. It depends on what the question that we're asking. So a phase 1 is typically a little bit shorter because you're looking at the safety of a particular medication in a given population. Phase 2 can be a little bit longer, but not quite as long as what we might see in a phase 3. So it's really dependent on the trial and exactly what they're looking to answer with that trial. And that comes back to the how do I qualify for the trial? Lots of different kinds of trials. But the exact criteria of a trial, that's really dependent on you and finding out what might be the links, and we'll talk about that in a moment. Trials, the question of how do trials fail? I don't know that I'd say that a trial, they fail to meet their endpoint, meaning that they're designed in a very specific way to answer a question. And that question the answer to that question might be no. And that means that they failed to meet their endpoint. They failed to do what they were hoping to see in that trial. But every trial we learn from. So there was a great example very recently of a large phase 3 trial that was called A4, the anti-amyloid in asymptomatic Alzheimer's. It was testing a drug that was targeting beta amyloid called solanezumab in a population of individuals that were enrolled where they had biology changes as measured by taking a picture of the brain, but they didn't have memory changes. They didn't have measurable memory changes. These individuals were in this trial for over 4.5 years. And at the end, they didn't find that there was an effect there, that those receiving the drug versus those that did not receive the drug, they didn't see a difference between the two populations. But the data and the information that comes from that trial are groundbreaking in the information that they're going to give us about how to do the next trial even better, and the next trial even better. And they give that kind of information that allows us to move just one step closer. So every trial that we get a result on gives us information about how to do the next trial even better. And that's just so incredible. People that participate in these clinical trials, they're my heroes.
I'll add to that, and then Mikey, please chime in. But my dad participated in the young blood plasma trial because I will tell you, and my dad was diagnosed, I was scrambling. I wanted something that I could do to figure out our future. And the best thing about that is I felt supported as well. And so I felt like we had a team. So the trial was like an emotional support, but also when you enter into a trial, you get tested up the yin yang. And I will tell you, all those test results made me feel like I was moving the needle, like I was doing
Oh, yeah.
something. So I encourage everybody. I've already offered to do a trial, but go ahead, Mikey.
No, I think you guys have covered it all. I think it's, we need more trials. We need people that don't even have any characteristics to join trials, because we need to see how the brain moves and changes over time. And we just don't have that information. Unlike the heart, where we can go in and look at it, and, the brain, you can't do that. So there's a lot of things that prevent us from moving forward. So we need trial participants for sure.
I would agree. And all the brain diseases that seem to be coming, that we need more information on. So it's a win-win. I agree. Mikey, what is a trial match? This is from Leandra.
Sure. Alzheimer's Association trial match connects individuals living with Alzheimer's. So caregivers, healthy volunteers, to clinical trials that might advance Alzheimer's research. Just like we were talking about before, they need this. It's a free, easy to use service that allows us to see which studies are a good fit for you and other family members. So search for those studies, receive email notifications about new opportunities, or connect with research teams. It's pretty straightforward. Yes.
Well, the other thing about, you brought up a really good point for families. If you participate in a trial, you're just gaining more information for your family. One of the biggest questions we get all the time is, am I going to get this, whether it's Parkinson's, Lewy body, or Alzheimer's. So it's really good to definitely go for a trial.
Well, I think just on that, it's one of the things, the challenges is, how do you find things? I mean, you were fortunate, Susan, in talking about it, that you had a clinician that linked you with a trial, but sometimes we don't have that kind of conversation with our healthcare provider. And so this is a way of us being able to be proactive, right? Being able to take that action for ourselves.
And I will say, for those of you that don't know, you should go on the Alzheimer's website, because the amount of resources and information are pretty tremendous, and their support is amazing. So please do that as well. And you will also be receiving a copy of the webinar. I know the information was so vast, but we'll receive a copy of the webinar, and then you can contact them directly. We'll have links for that. If my husband was diagnosed with Lewy body, can he qualify for a trial? Mikey?
Individuals living with dementia, caregivers, healthy volunteers without dementia are urgently needed to participate in hundreds of actively enrolling clinical trials focused on Alzheimer's and other dementias. So absolutely, there's so many different aspects of this Alzheimer's disease that we need to be studying. So absolutely, anyone hopefully qualifies if they're not too far advanced in the disease. They're really looking much earlier is where I think the trials are going, so that we can see, try to track the changes, but absolutely there are trials for Lewy body.
That's really good to know. And we just had a question come in, and I'll throw this out to both of you, but you touched on modifiable lifestyle, factors. Could you touch a little bit about, what our audience can do? They're obviously affected by Alzheimer's, and what can they do from the modifiable and non-modifiable?
Well, they always say, sleep, eating well, and exercising. Those, what's good for the heart's good for the brain. The Mediterranean diet, sort of eat the rainbow. Those things we absolutely know are helpful just, for everything, but of course it's great for the brain. Heather, do you want to add to that?
Yeah, I mean, I think Mikey hit it on a number of the ways, and I think it's what can we do to be a little bit healthier? So what are the habits that we have, and how can we make them a little bit healthier? All the things, being physically active, eating that balanced diet, staying engaged, staying cognitively and socially engaged. All of that is that use it or lose it kind of thing with our brain is definitely something that we hear and talk to. What we don't have today is that recipe of what is the most beneficial. Like, how much do I have to exercise? Exactly what I have to eat? When do I have to start? all of that. And there's a lot of work going on right now to answer that question, to try to give us that dose, if you will. That's another example of some of the clinical trials that are going on that you can find out more information at Trial Match.
Well, and what's good for your head is good for your heart, as Mikey would agree.
Exactly.
And non-modifiable, correct me if I'm wrong, would be your sex. You can't really change your genetic makeup and your genes. Is that right? Is there anything else?
And your age.
Oh, and your age. Oh,
sad.
shoot.
So
We're not
sad.
changing that now.
I mean, you know.
And this actually came in from Sean. It's a great question. My dad, in his human trial, they did a double blind, so he did get a placebo, but we didn't know which time he was going to get it, first or second. But this question is, what if I receive the placebo? Can I eventually get the drug? Heather?
Yeah, great question. And in fact, when you think about the benefits of participating in a clinical trial, one aspect of that is potential access. So within trials, you always have to have a comparator group. We have to know that there's benefits to receiving a drug, but we also have to know if there's harms. And this is true of any disease, right? Of any type of clinical trial. And so what the placebo is really that kind of control piece that allows us to say whether there's benefits or there's harms in a given drug or intervention that's being tested. And so trials do different things. Some of them might be a one-to-one. So you might have, for every person in the trial that's receiving the intervention, you have a person in the trial that's not. Some might do it in a different way, where they might have 3 that are receiving the intervention and 1. It very much depends on something we call power, which is how many people you have to have in the trial to see an impact or see a benefit. Yes, there's always a chance. There's always that possibility that you might receive a placebo, because it's what we call randomized, meaning that it's truly random, that you're put in the trial, and that's really the best way, so we can make sure that there's not a bias, that you don't have sort of one group being put into your placebo, and then you don't see things that could be potential harms. You don't see some of the things that could be unsafe, and we need to be able to evaluate that and ensure that the safety of participants and all those that may receive this treatment in the future are protected or guarded against, that we've evaluated those. So it is possible that within a trial that is a part of the decision-making process and part of the discussion with the study team. But the other side of that is that if the trial turns out to be positive or goes on to the next stage, typically, and this is certainly, again, part of the conversation that you should have with the person that you're talking to, typically then those that are within the trial, they'll do what they call maybe an open label extension, or they'll continue to receive the treatment. They'll continue to receive that intervention. And those that were on placebo are typically then given the option to then receive the drug. It becomes what we call unblinded, meaning that you can know whether you did or did not, and then you receive that. And for instance, right now, where we have a situation of drugs that are approved, but they're not being covered by the Centers for Medicare and Medicaid Services, those that were in the trial have access to those treatments. So that's an example and a benefit of having participated in those trials.
Well said. Ladies, what are the risks of a trial? Are there risks? Any side effects?
I'll take this one. So patient safety is the most important aspect of any Alzheimer's clinical trial. The procedures for every study are reviewed by an expert board, not directly involved in a trial, helping to ensure the patient's safety is protected. However, there are risks to clinical trials, including unpleasant or even serious side effects related to the potential treatments being studied, ineffective experimental treatments, details of risks related to participation in a clinical study are spelled out in the consensus form participants, and they sign when they agree to participate. All clinical trials end, and the early termination of a trial could cause strong emotions in participants. If a trial ends early, because of positive results, you may feel relieved and satisfied, and the trial ends early due to unfavorable results or safety concerns, you may feel really sad, disappointed, afraid, vulnerable, worried about what will happen next. It's important to understand that researchers have gathered important data, even if the results aren't positive. Yeah.
That's so important, the mental health aspect of that. I didn't even think about that, but I actually experienced that. Heather, do you have anything to add? Because we also have a question from Jane. What are the benefits of participating? in human trials.
Yeah, I mean, I think Mikey hit it really with there's risks, and this is part of that discussion, right? And part of that decision making. This is a disease, these diseases that cause dementia, Alzheimer's being the most common. These are for our families, for those of us that have personally lived this, which I think all of us have, we want a difference. We want to change it. I have 2 young kids. I want to know that the conversations that they have as adults about their parents are very different than the conversations we have today. I want to know that they have an avenue, that if there is a diagnosis, that there's opportunities. And so my tolerance or my weighing of the risk benefit might be different than somebody that hasn't been affected. And for any trial, you have to weigh that. You have to weigh that risk benefit. So maybe there's side effects, maybe there's those, but people are really closely monitored and trials are designed for that. There's usually a trial coordinator that becomes your best friend. You can ask all of those questions too, and ask all of that, you know, and ask for information about. But the benefits, well, one of them is what I mentioned, right? So if the trial is positive, then you might have access to a drug sooner. The other things are that, Susan, you talked about this being engaged, right? Feeling like you're taking a stand, feeling like you're taking that initiative in changing that science, and understanding if you have that, you know, at least understanding here, you might be sad if it doesn't go forward or all of that, but understanding that whatever the outcome, you're doing good for the next trial. You're moving the needle by being a participant. I think the combination of Part the Cloud and what Part the Cloud is doing with investing and funding these trials, along with the volunteers and participating in the trials, those are the 2 secret ingredients to move us faster forward.
I couldn't agree. I felt like I had a team, and they were not only, I mean, they were emotional support, because I couldn't go to other people. You know, if you have Alzheimer's, then you have a support group. But I have great friends, but Mikey was my friend. I didn't have a lot of people that were familiar with the disease. So I think that emotional support's super important. And then what Mikey said and what Heather touched on, we're doing this for future generations. We really are. I mean, hopefully with what Part the Cloud's doing, it's going to be sooner than later. So I think we all need to be aware that we're doing this for the better of the entire community, brain health community. A question came in from Jane. Can you continue on current medications while you're on a trial?
Depends on the trial. So typically, yes, there are inclusion-exclusion criteria. It does depend on the trial. Sometimes an existing medication or because that's usually a sign of an existing condition of some sort. Sometimes they're exclusionary, meaning that that you're not allowed to be in the trial because of that condition or because you're taking that medication. And sometimes that's because there's a worry about the medications interacting, right? And so again, it comes back to safety. It comes back to what Mikey said. Safety is the principal concern of these trials, right? We want to get the information, but we want to do it in the way that's as rigorous and as safe as possible for the participants. So it would really depend on the trial.
And Rosemary just asked a question. My 99-year-old mother has dementia. Could she qualify for a trial?
I think, again, it depends. A lot of trials do have an upper age limit, but not all of them. There's actually a trial going on right now called Preventable. I don't think it has an upper age limit. It is for individuals, and that's maybe for individuals that don't have cognitive impairment, but it is an example of a trial that has no age limit. So it depends on the trial. I would encourage you to check out Trial Match and see if there's a trial that might be right for you and where you are. Again, there could be something that is about a care intervention. There's lots of other kinds of trials. Not all of them are necessarily drug trials.
And I really want to get to this question, ladies. What are your thoughts on lecanemab? Is it easily accessible, and will Medicare cover the cost? What can we do as a community to help with that?
Well, I think I'll let Heather do this, but there's not a more important issue right now for the Alzheimer's Association and the community at large, because here we finally have a really good drug and Medicare is not supporting it. It is the first time that Medicare has not covered an FDA approved drug. So it is paramount that we get this approved, because there are 2,000 people a day who are being denied of getting this great drug. And it is such a crime, but I will let Heather talk more about it.
Yeah, so maybe just as a reminder, so lecanemab was one of the drugs that I mentioned that has been approved by the FDA. The other is aducanumab. Neither of these are covered by the Centers for Medicare and Medicaid Services. So the only way that somebody can access these drugs right now is to find a provider that is able to prescribe and then pay out of pocket. And it is a significant expense. I've met people around the country that are thinking about the different kinds of financial decisions that they're making or will need to make if this is something that they want to pursue or they want to try to get access to right now. And so it is a significant issue for many individuals that are in that earlier stage. So lecanemab as well as aducanumab were tested in a population of people with mild cognitive impairment due to Alzheimer's or mild Alzheimer's. So in the more early stages, this is when individuals have, there's certainly an impact on some of their cognitive and functional abilities, but they're able to participate in most things that they did in daily life. So it's that more early stage. The Alzheimer's Association's stance is that these have been approved by the FDA and that individuals that are in that earlier stage should have the choice of weighing that risk benefit that we talked a lot about within trials, but they're doing it within their treatment plan. They're doing that within their care plan, that they should have the choice and the ability to have that conversation with their healthcare provider. These aren't right for everybody. There are risks. They need to have that conversation with their healthcare provider to have that risk benefit and weigh that for them to be able to make that decision. Unfortunately, many can't do that right now because they're not able to access it and they're not able to make that decision for themselves. Actually, in the last 2 days in Washington, D.C., there's been over 1,000 advocates, or around 1,000 advocates, all in their purple. In fact, you see this isn't from this year, but you can see one of the sashes just behind me that people on Capitol Hill have been wearing, really making the case, telling their story and saying, this is what I would want. People living with this disease in that early stage. This is what I would like to have access to. This is a discussion I would like to be able to have with my healthcare provider. And in fact, there was a congressional briefing today, I think, as well. And if you look at Twitter and you look at any of the conversation, an incredible amount of support of this is something we can't deny people with Alzheimer's. They should be able to make that decision and have that coverage. And this is an opportunity, participate in a trial, engage with Parse the Cloud, but actually advocate too. Raise your voice in all of this and tell your legislators, tell your senators, your congressional leaders at the state and federal level that you want to see this covered for people with Alzheimer's in those earlier stages so that they can make that care decision.
That just pulls at my heartstrings. Mikey's staggering statistic of 2,000 people, I think it was a day. Correct me if I'm wrong, but that's just horrible. So please, everyone, you should have choices in your life, especially when you have been dealt this card of dementia or potentially dementia. So thank you, Heather and Mikey, for that.
Well, also, we've been waiting 2 decades for this, right? I mean, we've just been praying to get something through the pipeline, and we finally do. So it's very historic, but let's hope we're going to turn this tide around.
And we have time for one more question, and this one's near and dear. And I actually, Mikey had a beautiful presentation on this from one of your scientists from Arizona. I'll never forget it. It was the most informative presentation. And this is, I have heard Alzheimer's impacts women more. Is this true? Mikey, can you start with that?
No, it is true. Lifetime risk for Alzheimer's at age 45 is 1 in 5 for women and 1 in 10 for men. So almost 2/3 of Americans with Alzheimer's are women. So let's again turn that tide around. Heather, do you want to join in at all with that, or?
I mean, you're right. The statistics are staggering, right? The numbers living with it, the numbers that are providing care, and we don't completely understand why. But I live in a household with 2 young boys and my husband, and even from development, right? We know our brains are structured and function a little bit differently. There are different pathways just in how males and females learn. And so we see those differences from birth, and how does that contribute? How do our hormonal pathways contribute? How do our immune system differences, our vascular system? We hear about heart attacks are different in males and females. Well, how is that contributing to our brain, right? We've already talked about that heart-brain connection. A lot of really important work that's being done. And coming back to trials, we need to make sure that we have males, females, and representation across all communities in our studies. And that's something that Part the Cloud has really been a leader in setting that, requiring it as part of the plan, requiring it in the reporting that we get as well. And that's just, I think, something I'm so incredibly proud of, that we're really setting that standard of how these trials should be done and making sure that these treatments are going to work in all individuals.
Is there any trials that are specifically for women? Because we all know that women are challenged with a little bit of hormonal imbalance throughout their life. But is there a trial specifically just for women?
You know, I'm not aware of a trial that's only for women, because we actually see the hormonal changes that are going on in women, or also in men have different types of hormonal changes throughout life as well. There is one study, but I don't believe it's only in women, that is looking at kind of a hormone derivative that's part of the estrogen, estradiol pathways that's being evaluated. But again, I don't think it's just in women. I think it's in males and females.
And Heather, isn't Robbie Britton out of Arizona, who's one of our Part the Cloud researchers, are doing, menopause, and she's focusing a lot of her attention just on women. So I think whether that's part of her trial,
she's absolutely trying to understand the connections. Absolutely.
And Susan, that's who you met, and she spoke to us a while ago about that. But yes, she's focusing on the changes of women with menopause.
And to our audience today, and to those that will view this after, we'll send it to everybody. It'll also be in Kensington's newsletter. Thank you so much for joining us today, and let's all part the cloud together. And I am thrilled, and you made my day, to have this type of support behind this horrible disease is really encouraging. So thank you for moving that needle for all of us. With that, everyone be safe. Take care.
Thank you very much.
Thanks, Susan. Thanks, Mike.
Take care, Susan. Bye-bye. Thank you, everybody.